like to contact the show, send us an email at liveonfourlegspodcast@gmail.com or get involved in the conversation on social media. Join the Pearl Jam Podcast community group on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at liveonfourlegspod.
You can call me Al, you can call me Ed, you just fucking call me, why don't you?
Hey everybody now, welcome to a special edition of Live on Four Legs. We're going to take a couple of minutes and pay homage to the 25th anniversary of a fantastic record. Happens to be my favorite of the 11 studio albums that they've put out, Yield. 25 years ago, that feels like forever ago, and I know that for some people, 10 and thinking back 30 plus years now, like they have that memory, but Yield is almost in a way my 10. So I think we're going to get into that. We're just going to talk about the record and give you guys a little bit of a look back on this day that's fairly important. You know, it's a big milestone, 25. So let's get all into it. Randy Sobel over here, John Farrar over there.
Hello.
How about it? Yield.
Yeah, I mean it's not my favorite one, but I think I currently have it at number 3, which is very, very good. I had kind of a moment last year where I had to do kind of a late night drive, and I put on Yield, and I was like, I'm going to listen to this thing all the way through, and it really kind of gave me a new appreciation for it. The way it opens up, and it's sequenced very well. It takes you on feels like a ride, not necessarily a concept record, but it feels like it's got a narrative almost, and like it's a good one for driving late at night. That's all I'll say. MFC, obviously, but I think the rest of it works very well for that too. So that bumped it up for me. But yeah, it's a Jack record, so it's going to be high for me.
Yeah, look, I think you're right on the money with it being a car driving, not just it being MFC, but like I have so many memories of, again, driving it late at night or even, drives in the afternoon that were just long drives. And it felt like a song like Low Light was the perfect moment. Like, I even at times had kind of tried to set it up where I'd put the album in while the sun was setting. So once it gets to low light, I can kind of get that atmosphere around, and it happened like maybe once. But yeah, I feel like it has all those elements. It's just an album that moves. Every song has like a moving progression. Every song feels like it's taking you somewhere. And when you're driving, you can kind of, especially if you're on long distance, especially if you're just kind of on highways and stuff like that, you have a lot of time to sort of think, and it could kind of take you out of that moment where, you're in the headspace to think, and take you and invite you into the album and kind of grab you in its magic. It's a unique one for them because, No Code was really a sign of maturity, but it felt like once they hit Yield, a lot of the frustrations that were still apparent in No Code were kind of disappearing. And that made Yield feel like adult musicians were writing this record. And it even felt like, if you're listening to the production of it, of Brendan O'Brien, like I can't get enough about how these songs are produced. And a lot of that is just thanks to him being the sixth member of the band. But leading into kind of a new generation of Pearl Jam and leaving what was the 10 and Versus era behind, like this sort of set you up. And, for some people, it was set you up for, what would be a lifelong relationship with this band. And for some people, it was just, okay, I like the early stuff, but I'm out. But it kind of gave you a glimpse into what this band was going to turn into. And I feel like Yield was definitely the gateway into what they became.
Yeah, and it was definitely more collaborative. I think, you'd seen a little bit of that on No Code, obviously, but I think Yield was the one, I think, noted for like, Ed's gonna take a step back and like, hey, let's work on your song, and let's make sure that that everyone gets represented. You know, I think Jeff is writing lyrics for the first time, and like, yeah, I mean, you're seeing them kind of become the band that they had always like meant to be. They're kind of growing up into that established, you know, institution of a band that can just go make really good records, go play excellent live shows, and have it be sustainable. Like they got through the early 90s, the mid 90s when it was turbulent and it could have fallen apart, and like Yield is like, and I think I remember when it came out, it was like a lot of people were like, "Oh, Yield, you know, that means they're giving up. They're not going to be fighting anymore." You know, it's in this whole thing, and there was the whole thing with the yield signs, and like you got to look through the booklet to find the yield signs and all the different songs. But I think you know, time has shown us that that is not what it was. You know, yield means something different with regard to this record, and it really is. I think, you know, No Code is my favorite for a lot of different reasons, but I think Yield continues what No Code did, and kind of expands on it, and gives it a little more, you know, a little more maturity and a little more substance.
Yeah, like I said, like No Code is a lot of frustration. You know, songs like In My Tree, you can kind of feel that frustration when Ed's, you know, kind of screaming that chorus and everything. You get the bombastic drum hits. You get it during Habit, where Habits gets really intense, and that's written right in the middle of Vitalogy too, so it's still got that identity from Vitalogy. And then you got a song like Present Tense, and I feel like Present Tense was the perfect bridge between what this album was going to be, and between No Code and what this album was going to be, because I feel like Present Tense was sort of spaced out, kind of open. It was more reflective lyrics rather than you know, and obviously it comes together more on Vitalogy, some of the more frustrated lyrics and kind of anger and pent up aggression, but it still had a little bit of that on No Code too. But it felt like Present Tense especially felt like, yeah, after that they're going to write more songs that are like this, that are more introspective, that have a little bit more just looking at a different side of life. And you know, it feels like that record just kind of brings it out of you. And as I mentioned before, I don't want to get past this, but I kind of said that, you know, for you and for the majority of the Pearl Jam fan base, you know, you had 10 to grow up on. When you were 12, 13 years old, 10 came out and that was your world. Now, I had 4 records under my belt, but it's always what's brand new, what's in front of you. And it always felt like, because we, you know, me and my friends and some older friends that, you know, had more listening experience when it came to Pearl Jam and when it came to other music too, that 97 especially felt like we were starting to listen to Pearl Jam a lot more. And that kind of just, I guess, ramped up the anticipation for when this record came out. And we had listened to the band, we untook everything that we could. And then when the record came out, it's like, oh, well, now this is brand new. This is, you know, it's fresh. It's something different. And I think from what I didn't know back then is that how much I liked the record, but it's tough when you're 13, 14 years old, you know, you're bringing CDs with you on plane rides and on long car rides and stuff like that. And you bring a couple, and like those are your bread and butter CDs. For me, it was really, you know, Nimrod from Green Day, which celebrated a 25th anniversary not long ago, and Americana of Offspring. And it felt like those records were what I was at 13 years old. But when I listened to this record, it felt like I was listening to a mature album. And I don't think I saw it back then. Like, I think I just liked the record more than I even liked the individual songs, because I would just kind of listen and intake everything. You know, when you're 13 years old, you have a propensity of sort of getting into the habit of skipping around on songs. You're not listening to full records sometimes because you don't have the attention span to listen to full records at that age sometimes. It just happens. And once you grow up and you're like, oh, well, I recognize this song, but you get attached to it. I don't feel like I ever did that on Yield. I don't feel like there was ever really a song that I ever wanted to skip, even Red Dot. I always felt necessary to listen to the whole thing because it did feel like there was one long narrative, like you mentioned, that was being shared throughout. And, I think the whole thing together just felt like you were kind of putting the pieces of the puzzle together. And I don't think that my brain was able to, I guess, figure that out at the time. But it's interesting that even a record like that, there aren't a lot of hits off of it. Like Evolution was the one that was really the big hit, but Wishlist and Given to Fly, while known, didn't really get radio airway play as much as maybe they should. But I always felt it was necessary that I intake all of them, the deeper cuts, get into MFC, and there's little production things I love about this as well we can get into in a second. But even Push Me Pull Me, I thought at the time, wow, this is a really weird song, but it feels like I have to listen to it. I have to get through it. And yeah, I think it's one of the first records that took me in that direction where I didn't feel necessary to skip to some of my favorites.
Yeah, I was 20 when this came out, 1920. So I was kind of getting out of my Pearl Jam obsession that had been going on since from 1992 to 1996, 97. And I was getting into other things and getting into different music. But I do remember getting the record and listening to it a lot. And really, again, we think of Yield as this, it's more of the return to form. It's more of the soaring rock songs that they're known for, but it's a little more of a weirder record than people give it credit for. No Way's a weird song. Pilot, obviously there's another Jack Irons instrumental on here. You'd mentioned Color Red. Push Me Pull Me, definitely. And yeah, I think this record's got more to uncover, I think, than people think. A lot of the early stuff I talk about, 10 and verses, kind of straightforward. I've gotten everything I can get out of those records, but these middle ones, about Yield, Binaural Riot Act, you can still go back to those, I think, 20, 25 years later, like we're doing here, and I can still listen to that with fresh ears and get something out of it. I think the sign of just how strong it is, my favorites on this record have changed as the years have gone by. Originally it would have been Brain of J, MFC, Do the Evolution, and then but now I'm 44 years old. I look at all those yesterdays, Low Light, Given to Fly. Those are probably the three off of this record that I would go back to the most right now. I think Given to Fly is maybe their best song, period. And so that's something that's the strength of this record too, is it doesn't have, like I said, it doesn't have a lot of skippable songs. It rewards a listen of putting it straight on and listening to it straight through.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of that and, the threading of the needle has to, just hands go out to Brendan O'Brien for doing this, because I think that's such an important thing when creating an album is how are you going to attach the songs to each other and not make it so that, okay, one's over here, then the next. They have to have some correlation in a way. And there are little things that do that in this album. One of the first things I can think of is the Brain of J, in between Brain of J and Faithful, where you get that sort of little kind of sound effect that goes off. It always reminded me of the intro to Black Dog in a way. I guess it's some feedback of an amp or something like that. But that, just that little part ties the two songs together, because in reality, and you can think back to Milwaukee, the two songs should have nothing to do with one another. They're not alike at all. So when you have Brain of J, just a fast, hardcore punk rock song, And then Faithful, which especially the way that the intro goes in, it doesn't. Brain J, you'd think you kind of follow up in the same way that Binaural did, like, okay, here's another punk song, then here's another punk song. But no, like, you're going into one of the songs that soar, and then you get into a blues song, then you get into another soaring song, then you get into something that's a little bit more contemplative, a little bit more poppy. Like, it all just balances together. And even another one of those little things I love from Red Dot, at the end of it, you kind of get that little cricket chirp. You know what I'm talking about? Like right as it finish.
Yep.
And it felt like, I guess that Red Dot is on side B, but it felt like if you were to end that on side A, that's kind of like a way of saying, like, okay, this is done. Like, this was the daytime, now we're going into nighttime. And I don't know why I always put that together with that, but it just felt like all those B-side songs all attached to each other so well just because of that one little transition. And I don't know, it's tough for me to even comprehend that, but it's just part of it.
Yeah, I always think of that part as like setting the mood for MFC. Like you're out in the middle of nowhere, it's late at night, and then MFC kicks in. You're like, okay, I'm in the right frame of mind right now. But don't forget about, Push Me Pull Me, that gives a little sample of Happy When I'm Crying in there. That's super cool. That's something I always think of, like, man, they snuck in a little snippet of one of their weirdest songs in there. And yeah, Push Me Pull Me, like, when we talk about it live, it's so much different. They kind of sanitized and compressed it from the way the album version is. They have to when they play it. But the album version of Push Me Pull Me is one of the strangest things they've done. Like, go back and listen to that thing. Like, there's a lot going on there, and it's out there. That's another Jeff song.
It should turn you off, but in some way it doesn't.
Yeah, that Ed quote of like, "Oh, we thought you were with us on that one."
Yeah, right. And I mean, we can get into this in a second. The whole aspect of these songs being played live and how, Jack leaving the band after the Australian tour kind of, had something to do with that a little bit. But I think from a production aspect, you kind of said it a couple minutes ago, Given to Fly is the song off this record. You said maybe one of their best. And I guess if I'm going to say this, then it kind of goes along in the same breath that I have always thought that Given to Fly has been their best produced song. Just the way that the storytelling is done, the way that it kind of fades in and you hear that, that effect kind of just slowly enter the song and slowly enter your brain. And then you get the visuals from the lyrics. You get you're envisioning a young kid flying and a young kid persevering. And then it just keeps building. It keeps soaring to tell that story. And it's so well done that I don't think anything else production wise comes close to that. That's, it's all, music is all about storytelling. To me, that's one of my favorite aspects of it. If you can tell a story through not just your lyrics, but through your music and through the way that you're getting the atmospheric sounds surrounding your recording, then you're going to have you're going to put together a great song. So yeah, a lot of these have very interesting techniques. It always felt like No Way, in a way, always kind of felt a little tinny, but gets into developing, like that intro on No Way too, where it's kind of almost diffused a little bit, where you don't hear like the full guitar, kind of brings you into like what the song is initially like. You get visions of it. I always thought that like No Way would be something played, in sort of a secluded area, like, I don't know why I've always thought this, but like a wood cabin or something like that, like kind of out of the way. And I guess it's like that janky guitar or something that kind of brings that out of the song. And while not a song that works live very well too often, they've only played it 12 times, all of that from the record probably goes into why they're not interested in playing it.
Yeah, it makes you wonder why they stopped working with Brendan O'Brien for the next 11 years. They didn't go back to him until Backspacer. Like we talked about this too. Like what he could have done with binaural would have been very interesting, and it might have been even a continuation of this. But yeah, I agree. Yield is maybe their best produced studio album overall. Yeah, I think I'd agree with that.
Look, put it up against other Brendan O'Brien albums too. Like, is it one of his best work? If you Pearl Jam was his bread and butter. If you put it up against Pearl Jam records and say that was Brendan O'Brien's best produced, then you might as well say it for the entirety of what he's done. And that's a big, big catalog right there. So, look, that's something that you guys can bring up and debate with us on either Twitter or Facebook at the Pearl Jam Podcast Community Group, or Twitter at Live on Four Legs Pod. I know there are probably a lot of people listening to this that don't listen to the main platform stuff, but we are a podcast that covers a live show in every episode. We take something from all different kind of eras. Next week is going to be one from the binaural era in 2000, and we go to all different locations and talk about what they were doing on that night, the set list, the stories that are told, the stories that are told by the fans that really kind of bring in their angle from seeing the show and witnessing, and sort of what people will do to go out of their way to go to Pearl Jam shows. And it's just kind of a memory bank. We did this because you guys that go to shows and intake this and will go far and wide to do this are doing it because you want to make life-lasting memories. And there's some stuff that just kind of after a while, either you want to carry the story with you for as long as you can, or maybe it's something that you just kind of forgot about. It kind of gets locked into the vault a little bit while other shows remain in a cycle of prominence, like obviously things like Moline and Milwaukee and things like that. But we're trying to bring shows back that you might not have listened to in a very long time that are still important in a way because it came from this band. So that's what we do. And if you're listening to us on any platform, you can subscribe to us there. Also, if you're interested in more Yield content and perhaps supporting us as a podcast, we do have a Patreon, which you can donate as low as $1 a month and get all the content that is over there. And there's unlimited content, essentially. We have done past shows that are a little smaller than what we do for the main platform, like stuff from 1991 and 1992 and a lot of Bridge School shows. I think we did the whole catalog of them. So if you go on Patreon right now, you'll be able to see that there's a brand new episode for the Tibetan Freedom concert that happened in 1998. It was Matt Cameron's second show, not including the Letterman performance, but it's a very interesting topic to talk about. So if you are interested in it, head on over to patreon.com/liveonfourlegs, and you can subscribe right there, again, as low as $1 a month. But also on our website, liveonfourlegs.com, we should have a piece that's up right now that is focusing on the best live performances of Yield songs. So we go down the list and go down the track listing and list one or a couple of great performances of that song from the album. And that will take us into now talking a little bit more about the live aspect, since that's something that we have some knowledge on. So we kind of mentioned before about Jack. And, Jack joined the band in 1995, didn't really record Vitalogy with them, just did Foxy Mop, and did the whole 95 tour. Recorded No Code, did the whole 96 tour, and then he had some trouble with his mental health and anxiety. And after, I think he was having a problem with touring, especially. The band had a very rigorous schedule in 1998, and looking to the U.S. dates, which were like they were all on top of each other. It was a long tour. I think he sort of thought like he couldn't do it. He needed to get himself back together. So you lose a huge aspect of what made these two records stand out, and how, of course, like Matt Cameron is going to come in and fill the job, and he's been there ever since, and that in itself is a treat that they were able to get somebody as crucial and talented as that. Like, lucky that Soundgarden only broke up a year ago, because if they hadn't, then we don't know who it could have been. But what's your obviously you're a huge Jack guy. I'm a huge Jack guy too. But what do you think like about that era, like Jack leaving and how that kind of impacted the band and led way to Cameron? But like that's a pretty huge loss that you're getting right smack dab in the middle of an album year.
Yeah, and we had it had been pretty, I think, common knowledge that like they come out and said like, oh, Jack saved the band, like he brought some stability and felt like they were on the road to kind of getting back into it and like working on albums and touring and doing the whole thing, and it felt like this was something that was going to last. And then that rug gets kind of pulled out from under them, and yeah, it's just fortuitous that Cameron is there available. And he tells a story in the Pearl Jam 20 book that like, hey, just got a call one day, like they ambushed him, like, hey, we need you to come. You gotta learn 60 songs in 2 weeks or whatever because we're going on tour. Can you do it? And he was like, all right. And originally just a fill in. I think they weren't sure what they were gonna do, and then yeah, those 98 shows. I mean, that was that fall of 98 was the first time I got to see him. And it just felt like a completely new era. Like this is what it was meant to be. Cameron does everything well. Like I said, Jack is probably my favorite. I love the way he plays and the things that he added to the songs. But I mean, I think everyone would acknowledge that Cameron is the best drummer. Like he does everything well. He's a great songwriter. And he's added so much to them, and like he is the drummer at this point, going on 25 years. So, I remember it being a little bit up in the air, like, oh, they're losing another drummer, like we got to go through this again. But then when you heard it was going to be Matt Cameron, it's like, well, of course, like that makes perfect sense because everybody knew Temple of the Dog and like the history, and like yeah, obviously they're gonna grab the guy that they know from Seattle and like who was in Soundgarden and the friends and everything. So it just felt like the last piece of the puzzle was in place and fit, and they were just gonna keep going on and on. It like a start of a new era.
Yeah, and kind of the transition, you kind of said he had to learn all these songs, but he couldn't learn everything. And that sort of took half of that record and kind of left it in the dust a little bit. They were playing Evolution and Wishlist, Brain of J, and Given to Fly just about every night. Those were the core four of that record being played live. But some of the other songs, like Push Me, Pull Me, All Those Yesterdays, Low Light, Pilot, like No Way, those really didn't hit the rotation very often on this 98 tour. It was like little bits and pieces here and there. And I wonder if they felt more comfortable, they would have felt more comfortable with Jack on those songs than Matt, or if it was just kind of a time crunch thing. But it is interesting. And the most interesting thing about their live catalog and how they've put their songs and set lists together to me has always been the usage of Low Light. Not played at all on the tour year, not played at all after the record came out until I think it was 2001 at a Bridge School show. And then over the next 10 years or so, it's kind of considered one of these rarities. But now it's a staple. It's just one of these staples, and it kind of developed into that over time. But back then, they weren't giving it the time of day at all. It's like they had no use for it. But I always think that that's just super interesting to think about when thinking about this era, because you're not utilizing every single song, and it kind of, I think that it kind of bled into a little bit of binaural, where they weren't playing every single binaural song. Like some of the like Rival got left off a little bit. and then even going in Riot Act a little bit, like stuff like Help Help really didn't see rotation very often. Ghost didn't see rotation very often. And yeah, Yield songs, just for being as good of a record that it was, it's kind of a what if thing. Like, what if Jack stuck around? Would these songs resonate more, or have a greater resonation with the crowd now than they could have had in '98?
Oh yeah, I think they definitely like would have played more of the record. You would have seen, I think, more of those kind of songs, just from a familiarity standpoint. But yeah, it's like it's a tale of two records because like on one side you look at Given to Fly, what 500 times now, close to Wish List, got to be in the 300s probably. Do the Evolution over 500, and then you look at some of these like Push Me Pull Me, less than 20. Pilot, not very many. No Way, I think you talk about 12. So some on one hand, it's like these huge, big, like every night fan favorite songs, and the other side of it is like these super rare, like ones that they never break out. But yeah, it just somehow it works well together, and you saw that like in Milwaukee, which we just talked about when they went through the whole thing and played the whole thing. It's like that was super cool, like to hear it all together and hear it all fit together with, especially with Cameron behind it, kind of putting his stamp on all these songs. Yeah, it's one of their best.
Yeah, and I think back to what's happening now and how some of those songs have stuck around in the set. And we have a little series that we do over on our subscription platform or on Patreon that is the evolution of certain songs and how they've progressed live. And one of them that we've done is Given to Fly. And Given to Fly, Evolution are the best two examples of this, and just how the attachment over time has grown with the crowd, and it's grown to levels where if they play this down in South America, Evolution will have the massive crowd response singing those solo notes that Stone is playing in the middle of the song. Given to Fly, another one where crowds get really into it, scream along with the band. They get all the call and response moments, and they become it becomes sort of this thing that's sort of bigger than the record at that point, and it makes you feel like Yield is still represented pretty well, because not a lot of records that follow have the every night song staples. Binaural doesn't have one.
Yep.
Riot Act, really doesn't have one. Save You and I Am Mine are not played every night.
Nope.
Avocado
doesn't have one.
No.
Nope.
Backspacer, they didn't play Just Breathe at all this year.
Yep.
A little bit on Unthought Known, but they kind of got away from it on that tour. And yeah, Lightning Bolt's kind of too soon to know, but knowing that two of their top songs on that whole tour in that span, Lightning Bolt and Sirens, didn't really get played at all this year. I think a total between the two once. It's impressive that songs are from that record are being held over and being played over 500 times, because it's just attachment. It's how the band reacts to what the crowd is doing. It's how the crowd is reacting to what the band is doing, and it just so happens that those two songs connect so well that they've been forever staples.
Yep, and like they're the ones. I mean, they get just as big a reaction as a Jeremy or a Black or Porch or stuff like that. So yeah, it's in the strength of the songwriting. And you look at this where you've got McCready has 3 songs, Stone has 4 songs, Jeff has 3 songs. There's only 2 Ed only songs on this record, MFC and Wishlist.
Yeah,
it's really they were really able to use the strength of everyone and the collaboration to make the songs that I think they the stories they worked on the songs is to before they went in the studio to make sure that they make them as good as possible. And they don't. I always think of that clip from the PJ20 DVD where Mike talks about writing Faithful, and like Stone had this riff or Mike had the riff, and like, man, I got this and this, but I don't know how to get from here to here. and calls up Stone's like, Stone, yeah, you just do this. You just go do, and then it's done. And he's like, oh, of course, that's genius. Like it's really showed the strength of all of them as a unit together. And I think that really, really comes through on the record.
Yeah, absolutely. Firing on all cylinders and kind of, knowing what the other hand is doing without having to look at it, The band was gelling really well, and I think that's a reason why they really felt that, Jack leaving the band could have had, bigger implications, could have been worse for them, because that whole production, we saw it go down in Single Video Theory, how everything happened, and they were gelling. They just knew how to write songs, and they knew what to do with them. And I think from the aspect of another drummer leaving for them, but if it wasn't Cameron, who would have known? Who knows what would have happened with this band? I want to get into, the one song that we haven't really mentioned at all is In Hiding. And that might be one of the best three songs from this record. I just felt the need to just bring that up and give it its moment for a second. It's a wonderful rock and roll song. And I think it's another that, like you were saying with Faithful, how Stone and Mike sort of play together, and kind of one does something while the other does another thing, but they're still kind of in the same zone. It happens on In Hiding too, and I think it just makes for a very melodic sound, and it's really hard sometimes to replicate that live. But, In Hiding is a sneaky, awesome live song too. You got to think there are moments that you can go back on where the crowd is singing along. They're just passionate about it, and in some other life form, maybe that's like one of their staples. But it's like the song, almost like the song off of Yield, that feels like you got something special during the show.
Yeah, they played it in Louisville last year, and I remember it being really, really good. It's another one that I think took on a little bit more of a meaning during the pandemic, where it's like it felt like we were all a little bit in hiding. So that was one that I think I remember I went back to a little bit more than usual, and it gave a little more meaning. So, but yeah, I mean, yeah, one of the great, like, late in the record deep cuts that they have. Yeah, in hiding should have been played a lot more than it has been.
So, yeah, I think we kind of touched all the bases here. Is there anything else from this record that, you know, I guess that kind of needs to be addressed? 25 years is fantastic. And, I don't think there's been a year in that 25 where I haven't listened to this record. Even the years that I wasn't focusing on Pearl Jam a whole lot, I made sure to go back to this one when I wasn't going back to tenor verses. Like, it's weirdly special. And it's not going to be special for critics. It's not going to be special to, even the casual Pearl Jam fan. But I think for a lot of the, passionate diehards out there that really intake this band, I think that Yield is one of those records that, adds in that extra element into their fandom, makes them feel like they're a part of this. Well, we're going to finish this episode, and I'm not telling my all-time Brain of J story that I tell every single time, because it feels like I do tell that every single time. So I'm holding you guys out of that, but I can't even tell you where you could listen to that. But I feel like for most normal, everyday listeners, you probably heard that story before. So I'm going to hold out on it. But that was Yield, giving it its due on the 25th anniversary. And if there was a best performance ever of any Yield song, what do you think it is?
Ooh, probably one of the Do the Evolutions from South America, or for me personally, it's Given to Fly from Greenville. I think on that episode talked about how special that was for me, like nearly brought me to tears. And I think like when they came back in late 2021, I remember like watching a live stream and hearing Given to Fly and being like, man, like that really hit me as far as like how much I missed live music and being a part of something and being a part of a crowd. But those would be the two. One for overall and one for me personally.
All right. Well, I think, you kind of made a play for that personally. So we're going to close on out with a version of Given to Fly that John got to celebrate live, and say thank you guys for tuning in. And hopefully you guys can subscribe over on Spotify or Apple and leave us 5 stars if you really enjoyed what you were listening to. And hey, if you have a show that you went to that you would like to hear somebody kind of go over and talk about the songs and talk about the stories, then we might have done your show. We might have covered it on an episode. We have well over 200 episodes and shows that we've covered. So possibly look into that. We have a massive archive. You can check it out at liveonfourlegs.com. And if there's something that you're really, really interested in, then always our inbox is open. liveonfourlegspodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to send us a message, and we can put it on some list for later usage. So I wish everybody well and happy birthday to Yield, and hopefully you guys get a chance to intake this record before the anniversary is up. But hey, the anniversary is a celebration of the whole year. That might be a little bit of a hint to what we're going to be doing on the podcast for the future. So keep that in mind. Till then, we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Could have tuned in, but he tuned out. A bad time, nothing could save him. Alone in a corridor, waiting lined out. He got up out of there and for hundreds of miles. They made it to the ocean at a smoke in a tree. The wind rose up, set him down on his knees. Oh, we keep fishing like a fish in a jar. To live and if we say, look at me now. Arms wide open with this easy score. Whoa, no. Floating back down cause we wanted to share this key to the locks on the chains that he swung everywhere. Oh, but first he was stripped, then he was stabbed by a faceless man. Yeah,